The landlord evicted the single mom with nothing, but then her dog started scratching at the walls. What looked like just another cruel eviction turns into something no one could have imagined, because behind the broken plaster was a secret sealed away for more than 60 years. A hidden doorway, a dusty rocking horse, and a box holding a message no family should ever forget. As this mom fights to survive with her child, she stumbles onto a mystery that powerful people spent generations trying to bury. Why was this room hidden? What happened to the woman who wrote desperate words in a diary, begging anyone to save her child? And most of all, will uncovering the truth finally set a family free or destroy what's left of it forever? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Sunlight crept through the dusty windows of the small duplex, casting long shadows across stacks of cardboard boxes. Emily Carter folded another worn t-shirt, her movements mechanical but careful, as the weight of the morning pressed heavily upon her shoulders. The early spring air carried a chill that the building's ancient heating system couldn't quite chase away. "Mom?" Danny's small voice quivered as he clutched his teddy bear, a threadbare companion that had seen better days, much like their current situation. "Do we have to pack Mr. Whisker's room too?" Emily paused, looking at the corner where Danny had created a makeshift house for his bear using an old shoebox and crayon-drawn decorations. Her heart ached at the sight of her 7-year-old son, small fingers wrapped tightly around his beloved toy, dark eyes wide with uncertainty. "Yes, sweetie," she said softly, managing a smile despite the heaviness in her chest. "But we'll make him an even better room wherever we end up." Buddy, their golden retriever, paced between the boxes, his nails clicking against the worn hardwood floor. His usual happy demeanor was replaced with anxious energy as he watched his family's life being dismantled piece by piece. Every now and then, he would let out a low whine, his tail drooping instead of showing its usual cheerful wag. "It's okay, boy," Emily reassured him, though she wasn't sure who needed the comfort more. She ran her fingers through his soft fur, drawing strength from his steady presence. The sharp rap at the door made them all jump. Buddy's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Emily knew that knock, sharp, impatient, like a woodpecker with a grudge. "Coming," she called out, quickly wiping her hands on her jeans, and shooting Danny a reassuring look. "Stay here with Buddy, okay?" She opened the door to find Frank Holloway's imposing figure filling the frame. The landlord's face was set in its usual scowl, his eyes cold as they swept past her to assess the packing progress inside. "Making sure you're on schedule, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of barely concealed disdain. "Rent's been overdue for 2 months now. You need to be out by end of day." Emily straightened her spine, though she barely reached his shoulder. "I know, Mr. Holloway. We'll be out by then, I promise." Frank's lip curled slightly as he watched Danny carefully placing his books in a box, Buddy hovering protectively nearby. Well, looks like someone's learning early about what happens when you can't pay your way." He turned his gaze back to Emily. "Should have expected as much from people like you." The words hit Emily like a physical blow, but she refused to flinch. Heat rose in her cheeks as she thought of all the extra shifts she'd picked up, all the meals she'd skipped to make sure Danny had enough to eat, all the nights she'd stayed up mending clothes instead of buying new ones. "People like me?" she repeated, her voice quiet but steady. "You mean people who work 2 jobs? People who've never missed a payment until this winter when heating costs nearly doubled?" She took a deep breath. "Or maybe you mean single mothers doing their best to raise good children." Frank's expression darkened. "Don't get smart with me. Just make sure you're out by 5 o'clock. And keep that dog of yours under control. He's been scratching up the walls again." As if on cue, Buddy moved away from Danny and trotted to a corner of the living room. He began pawing at a section of old wallpaper, his nails making a peculiar sound against the wall. "Buddy, no!" Emily called out sharply, embarrassment coloring her voice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway. He's just upset about the moving." Frank glared at the dog before turning on his heel. 5 o'clock, Mrs. Carter. Not a minute later, as the door closed behind him, Emily leaned against it, letting out a long breath. She was about to return to packing when the sound caught her attention. Buddy's paws against the wall made a hollow, echoing noise, like something was empty behind the plaster. "Buddy, come here," she called, but her eyes remained fixed on that corner of the room, her ears catching that unusual resonance that seemed to whisper of something hidden behind those tired old walls. Danny looked up from his careful packing of books. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Yes, sweetie," she answered automatically, though her mind was still caught on that hollow sound. Let's keep packing." But even as she turned away, that empty echo seemed to linger in the air, like a question waiting to be asked. The late morning sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the maze of cardboard boxes filling the small living room. Emily paused in her packing to check on Danny, who had finally dozed off on a blanket spread between stacks of their belongings. His teddy bear was tucked securely under one arm, his face peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. She smiled softly at the sight, grateful for this moment of quiet. The morning's confrontation with Frank Holloway had left her nerves raw, but Danny's steady breathing helped calm her racing thoughts. Buddy, who had been unusually restless all morning, suddenly perked up his ears. His tail began to wag as he trotted back to that same corner of the room, pawing at the faded wallpaper with determined focus. "Buddy, please," Emily whispered, not wanting to wake Danny. "We don't have time for." Her words trailed off as she noticed something odd. Each time Buddy's paw struck the wall, there was that hollow sound again, not the solid thud she'd expect, but something different. Empty. Wrong. Emily glanced at Danny, making sure he was still asleep, then grabbed the broom she'd been using to sweep. With tentative movements, she extended the wooden handle and tapped the wall where Buddy had been scratching. Thunk. Normal. She moved the handle slightly to the right. Thunk. Still solid, but when she tapped the exact spot Buddy seemed fixated on, the sound changed completely. Thum. The hollow echo filled the room like a whispered secret. Her heart began to race. Emily ran her fingers along the wallpaper, feeling subtle irregularities beneath the surface. There were seams in the plaster that didn't match the rest of the wall's pattern. "What are you hiding?" she murmured, more to herself than the wall. With trembling fingers, she gripped a loose edge of wallpaper and pulled gently. The aged adhesive gave way with a soft crackle, revealing yellowed plaster underneath. But it wasn't like the other walls. This section had distinct edges, too geometric to be accidental damage. Buddy whined encouragingly, his tail wagging faster as Emily continued peeling away the paper. Her hands shook as she exposed more of the unusual pattern in the wall. A sudden sharp intake of breath behind her made Emily jump. "Mom," Danny's voice was filled with wonder. "Is that a secret door?" She turned to find her son sitting up on his blanket, teddy bear clutched tight, his eyes wide with excitement. "I'm not sure, sweetie," Emily said, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. It might just be old damage we're uncovering. But Danny was already scrambling to his feet, Buddy dancing excitedly around him. "Can we open it, please? It looks just like in my storybooks." Emily bit her lip, studying the increasingly suspicious seams in the plaster. Her practical side screamed that they needed to focus on packing. They had less than 6 hours before Frank would return. But another part of her, the part that still believed in mysteries and possibilities, couldn't let this go. "Let me just check something first," she said, moving to the kitchen to grab a butter knife. Using the dull blade, she carefully began chipping at the plaster along one of the seams. The old material crumbled easily, revealing a definite edge underneath. More than that, there was a gap behind it, confirming the hollow sound they'd heard. "It really is a door." Danny bounced on his toes, his earlier sadness about moving temporarily forgotten. "What do you think is behind it?" Emily's mind raced with possibilities, none of them necessarily good. "Danny, we don't know if it's safe. Maybe we should." The sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch cut her off. Buddy's ears flattened as a familiar aggressive knock rattled the door. "Mrs. Carter." Frank Holloway's voice boomed through the thin wood. "Open up." Emily's heart leaped into her throat. She quickly pressed the loose wallpaper back against the wall, praying it would stick enough to hide their discovery. "Coming," she called out, her voice higher than normal. She gestured for Danny to sit back with his books, trying to make the scene look as normal as possible. When she opened the door, Frank's imposing figure filled the frame, his face twisted with impatience. "Time's up, Carter. I've got potential renters coming to view the place in an hour." "But you said we had until 5 o'clock. Emily protested, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Plans change," Frank snapped, pushing past her into the living room. His eyes swept across the boxes, lingering for a moment on the corner where Buddy still sat alert. "I want you out, now." Emily's gaze darted to the wall, checking if the loose paper was visible. Her mind whirled with questions about what lay behind that hidden door, but Frank's presence made it clear, those questions would have to wait. "We'll need at least another hour to finish packing," she said, forcing herself to meet his cold stare. Frank's jaw tightened. 30 minutes, not a second more. He turned and stalked out, leaving the door open behind him in a clear message, "Get moving." Emily closed the door softly, her eyes drawn back to that corner of the room. The wallpaper hung there innocently, but now she knew its secret. What else was this old house hiding? What other mysteries lay behind these walls that Frank seemed so eager to get them away from? But with Frank's deadline looming, she had no choice but to leave those questions unanswered. For now. "Come on, Danny," she said, tearing her gaze away from the concealed door. We need to pack faster. Yet even as she turned to gather their remaining belongings, her eyes kept drifting back to that corner, where Buddy sat guard over whatever secrets lay hidden behind those old walls. The digital clock on her sister Jane's dashboard read 11:15 when Emily pulled into the darkened driveway of her old duplex. Buddy's warm breath fogged the passenger window as he peered intently at the familiar building. "Stay close," Emily whispered, though she knew she didn't need to tell him. The golden retriever never strayed far from her side. The night air bit through her thin jacket as she crept across the creaking porch, grateful she'd remembered to grab her house keys before leaving earlier. The empty rooms echoed with her footsteps as she made her way inside, boxes casting strange shadows in the beam of her flashlight. Emily's heart drummed against her ribs as she approached the corner where they'd discovered the hidden door. The loose wallpaper hung limply, like a curtain protecting whatever secrets lay behind it. Buddy pressed against her leg, his tail low but wagging slightly. "Here goes nothing," she murmured, peeling back the paper. The crumbling plaster came away easier now, chunks falling to the floor as she widened the opening they'd started earlier. The beam of her flashlight revealed rough wooden edges of what was clearly a doorframe, concealed for who knew how many years behind the wall. Emily pushed against the surface, feeling it give way with a grinding sound. Dust billowed out, making her cough. The opening was narrow, she'd have to turn sideways to squeeze through. For a moment, she hesitated. What if the space beyond wasn't stable? What if there were animals living in there? But Buddy was already nosing his way through the gap, his tail disappearing into the darkness. Taking a deep breath, Emily turned sideways and followed. The beam of her flashlight cut through decades of dust, illuminating a space about 10 feet square. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling like tattered lace, and the air held the musty sweetness of old paper and forgotten things. The floor was solid beneath her feet, an extension of the house's original structure, not some makeshift addition. "Oh my goodness," Emily breathed, sweeping the light across the room. Boxes and trunks lined the walls, their surfaces thick with dust. But what caught her eye was the rocking horse standing proudly in the center of the room. Despite years of abandonment, it remained perfectly upright, its painted eyes seeming to watch her every move. The wood was faded but still beautiful, carved with intricate details that spoke of careful craftsmanship. Emily approached it slowly, running her fingers along its arched neck. The touch left clear trails in the dust, revealing deep cherry-colored wood underneath. She gave it a gentle push, and the runners creaked softly, rocking back and forth in a rhythm that felt almost alive. Buddy's sudden movement drew her attention to a large trunk in the corner. He pawed at it insistently, looking back at her with urgent eyes. "What is it, boy?" Emily knelt beside the trunk, noting its brass fixtures and leather straps. Unlike the other boxes, this one had a proper lock, though age had corroded it almost completely through. With trembling fingers, she worked at the mechanism until it crumbled away. The lid was heavy, but it opened smoothly on well-oiled hinges. The smell of old paper and leather wafted up, along with something else, a faint trace of lavender, perhaps from some long-ago sachet. Emily's flashlight revealed a collection of papers and objects carefully preserved inside. On top lay a stack of letters, their envelopes yellow with age but still sealed. Beneath those, she found a small leather-bound book, a diary, its pages wavy with time but intact. Her breath caught as she lifted something heavy and metal from the bottom of the trunk. A military medal gleamed dully in her flashlight beam, its ribbon faded, but still showing traces of rich purple. She turned it over carefully, trying to make out the inscription, but the text was too worn to read clearly. Buddy whined softly, pawing at the trunk again. The sound echoed slightly in the confined space, reminding Emily of where they were, trespassing in a hidden room, in a house that wasn't theirs anymore. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rocking horse seemed to watch silently as she carefully lifted the diary from the trunk. Something about it pulled at her, a need to understand what she'd stumbled upon, whose secrets she'd discovered. The sound of a car passing on the street outside made her jump. She quickly closed the trunk, trying to leave everything else exactly as she'd found it. The diary felt warm against her chest as she tucked it inside her jacket. Buddy led the way back through the narrow opening, his nails clicking softly on the floor. Emily followed, carefully pulling the loose wallpaper back into place as best she could. In the beam of her flashlight, the corner looked almost normal again, giving no hint of the mysterious room beyond. The night air felt shockingly cold after the closeness of the hidden space. Emily hurried to her car, Buddy close at her heels. As they drove away, the weight of the diary pressed against her, full of questions waiting to be answered. Early morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of Emily's sister's house, casting warm patches on the worn wooden table. Danny sat across from her, spooning up colorful cereal with the careful concentration only a 7-year-old could muster. Milk dribbled down his chin as he worked his way through his breakfast, the sound of crunching filling the quiet kitchen. Emily's fingers trembled as she opened the leather-bound diary. Buddy lay at her feet, his warm presence reassuring against her ankles. The first page held neat, feminine handwriting that spoke of care and precision, property of Grace Holloway, 1957. Her heart skipped a beat. Holloway, the same last name as Frank, their landlord. Could there be a connection? The first entry drew her in immediately. April 15th, 1957. The house feels so empty without James. Every corner holds memories of him, his coffee cup still sitting by the sink, his shoes still lined up by the door. The army officers said he died bravely in Korea, but how does bravery matter when my husband is gone forever? Only my sweet baby girl keeps me going now. When she smiles, I see James in her eyes. Emily's throat tightened. She glanced at Danny, peacefully eating his cereal, and her heart ached for Grace's loss. The next few entries painted a picture of a young widow's struggle to keep going, to find joy in small moments with her daughter, despite her grief. May 3rd. Lily took her first steps today, right across the living room floor. I wish James could have seen it. He would have scooped her up and tossed her in the air, making her giggle that wonderful baby laugh. She's growing so fast. Sometimes I catch myself talking to James about her, telling him all the things he's missing. Danny's spoon clinked against his empty bowl. Can I watch cartoons, Mom? Emily looked up, momentarily disoriented, as she pulled herself back to the present. Sure, sweetie. Just keep the volume down, okay? As Danny scampered off to the living room, Emily returned to the diary. The entries grew darker as summer approached. June 20th. Someone was watching the house again today. I saw a shadow move past the kitchen window, but when I looked out, no one was there. I'm probably just being silly, but ever since James died, I feel so vulnerable. At least Lily's too young to notice my worry. Emily's skin prickled. She turned the page, and a folded letter slipped out. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age. She carefully unfolded it, revealing more of Grace's careful handwriting. My dearest Lily, I write this hoping you'll never need to read it, but a mother must prepare for everything. You are my whole world, my precious girl. If anything ever happens to me, know that I love you more than life itself. I see so much of your father in you, his determination, his gentle heart. Stay strong, my darling. Remember that love leaves traces that can never be erased. The letter ended abruptly, as if Grace had been interrupted while writing. Emily's hands shook as she returned to the diary. The next entries grew increasingly anxious. July 10th. The footsteps on the porch at night are getting more frequent. I called the police again, but they say they can't do anything without proof. Lily doesn't understand why we keep the curtains closed all day. Then, suddenly, Lily vanished from the entries. The little girl who had filled pages with her first words, her toddling steps, her favorite games, disappeared as completely as if she'd never existed. Grace's writing became sparse, her once neat handwriting growing jagged and rushed. August 2nd. The walls have ears. Can't trust anyone. Must keep quiet. August 5th. They're watching. Always watching. The final entry was a single line, dated August 8th. God forgive me, I have no choice. Emily sat back, her coffee long cold beside her. Buddy whined softly, pressing his nose against her leg. The morning sunlight seemed colder now, casting shadows instead of warmth. Grace didn't leave. Emily whispered to Buddy, her mind racing with possibilities. She disappeared. Mom. Danny's voice called from the living room, startling her. The landlord is outside again. Emily's heart jumped into her throat. She could see Frank's bulky silhouette through the front window, moving toward the house. Quickly, she slid the diary into her purse, tucking it beneath her wallet and keys. The sound of heavy footsteps approached the front porch, and Buddy's fur bristled as he stood, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Emily's heart pounded as Frank Holloway's heavy footsteps echoed on the front porch. She quickly zipped her purse closed, the diary safely hidden inside. Buddy moved protectively in front of Danny, who had wandered back into the kitchen. The sharp knock made them all jump. Through the window, Frank's broad shoulders cast a dark shadow across the morning light. Emily took a deep breath, squeezed Danny's shoulder reassuringly, and opened the door. Miss Carter. Frank's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. His eyes, normally cold and dismissive, now held something more calculating. Interesting thing happened last night. My security camera caught someone sneaking around the duplex after dark. Emily kept her face neutral, though her pulse quickened. Really? That must be concerning for you. Very. He leaned closer, his cologne overwhelmingly strong. Looked an awful lot like you, and that dog of yours. Behind her, Buddy's low growl vibrated through the room. Emily resisted the urge to look back at her purse on the kitchen table. I've been here all night with my son, she said firmly. Maybe check your camera again. Frank's eyes narrowed, scanning past her into the house. Funny thing about old buildings, they hold secrets. Things people might think are worth sneaking around for. He straightened up, adjusting his jacket. Just remember, Miss Carter, anything found in that duplex belongs to the Holloway family. After he left, Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her hands shaking slightly. Danny hugged her legs. Mom, are you okay? She managed a smile, ruffling his hair. Just fine, sweetie. Hey, how about we take a little trip to the library today? Danny's face lit up. Can Buddy come too? Of course. Emily grabbed her purse, the diary's weight now feeling even more significant. I need to look up some old information. The town library was a Victorian mansion converted decades ago, its stone steps worn smooth by generations of feet. A small, service animals welcome sign allowed Buddy to pad quietly beside them as they entered the hushed interior. The elderly librarian at the front desk looked up as they approached. Her silver hair caught in the sunlight streaming through tall windows. Her name tag read, Mrs. Henderson. Good morning, Emily said softly. I'm hoping you might be able to help me with some local history research. Mrs. Henderson's eyes crinkled warmly. That's my favorite kind of help to give. What period are you interested in? Emily glanced around, making sure no one else was within earshot. The 1950s, specifically. I'm trying to learn about someone named Grace Holloway. The change in Mrs. Henderson's expression was immediate. Her smile faded, replaced by something more complex. Recognition, sadness, and what looked like old anger. Grace, she whispered, shaking her head slowly. I haven't heard that name spoken aloud in years. She gestured for Emily to come closer. Such a lovely young woman. She used to bring her little girl here for story time. Emily's heart skipped. You knew her personally? Oh yes. I was just starting my career here when... Mrs. Henderson paused, glancing at Danny who was browsing a nearby shelf of children's books. She lowered her voice further. When she disappeared. Disappeared? Emily echoed, though she'd already suspected as much from the diary. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her fingers absently straightening papers on her desk. August of 1957. One day she simply vanished, left everything behind. Clothes, furniture, even her daughter's toys. The police investigated, but, she shrugged helplessly. The Holloway family had considerable influence back then. They managed to quiet things down rather quickly. Emily felt a chill despite the warm library air. What happened to her daughter? Lily? Mrs. Henderson's eyes grew distant with memory. She was sent to live with relatives out of state. Such a sweet child. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old at the time. The librarian straightened suddenly, as if catching herself. Why the interest in Grace, after all these years? Emily hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. I've been living in one of the Holloway properties. I just became curious about its history. Mrs. Henderson studied her face carefully. Be cautious with that curiosity, dear. Some old wounds in this town never properly healed. Emily thanked her and gathered Danny and Buddy, her mind spinning with new questions. They spent the next hour searching through microfilm records of old newspapers, but found only a single small article about Grace's disappearance. Buried on page 6. Local mother missing. Police investigating. No follow-up stories ever appeared. That evening, after Danny was asleep in the guest room at her sister's house, Emily sat in the dim kitchen with Grace's diary. Buddy lay at her feet as she turned to the final pages she hadn't yet read. The entry was dated August 7th, 1957. My dearest Lily turned 3 today. We had a tiny celebration, just the two of us, with a cupcake I managed to bake. She doesn't understand why we couldn't have a real party. How do you explain to a toddler that mommy is afraid to let anyone know where we are? The watching has gotten worse. I know now it wasn't my imagination. They want something James must have known about before he died. I've seen them searching the house when they think I'm not home. My sweet girl deserves so much better than this fear. If anything happens to me, please find Lily. The entry ended there, the pen mark trailing off, as if Grace had been interrupted mid-sentence. Emily touched the faded ink, feeling a deep connection to this mother from the past who had clearly been terrified for her child's safety. Buddy whined softly, pressing his nose against her hand. Emily scratched behind his ears, her other hand still resting on the diary's worn pages. What happened to you, Grace? She whispered. And what were they looking for? The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Emily parked her car a block away from the duplex. She checked her watch. 7:45 in the morning. Danny was safely at school, and she had at least 2 hours before anyone might notice her absence from work. Buddy padded silently beside her as they approached the building from the back, his tail low and alert, The fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet, despite Emily's attempts to step quietly. Her heart thundered in her chest as she used the key she hadn't yet returned to unlock the rear door. The duplex felt different in the morning light, emptier, with dust motes dancing in the pale sunbeams that streaked through bare windows. Their footsteps echoed in the vacant rooms where their furniture had stood just days before. Emily touched the wall where family photos had hung, leaving lighter rectangles on the faded wallpaper. "Come on, boy," she whispered to Buddy. "Let's see what else Grace left behind." They made their way to the hidden door, which now gaped open like a dark mouth in the wall. Emily clicked on her flashlight and squeezed through the narrow opening, Buddy following close behind. The beam of light caught cobwebs that stretched like silver threads across the space. The rocking horse stood sentinel in the gloom, its painted eyes seeming to watch their every move. Emily remembered Grace's final diary entry about her daughter's 3rd birthday. Had little Lily ever played on this very horse? The thought made her chest ache. She directed the flashlight beam beyond the horse, into the deeper shadows of the crawlspace. The ceiling sloped downward, forcing her to crouch as she ventured further in. The air grew mustier, thick with decades of undisturbed dust. Buddy moved ahead of her, his nose working overtime. He stopped suddenly, pawing at something in the corner. Emily shuffled forward on her knees, shining the light where he indicated. "What is it, boy? What did you find?" The dog's claws scraped against wood, clearing away layers of dust and debris. A small box began to take shape, no bigger than a paperback book, made of dark wood with brass hinges. It looked like a jewelry box, or perhaps a music box. Emily's hands trembled as she lifted it. The wood felt smooth beneath the grime, well-made and expensive. A tiny key protruded from the lock on the front. She turned the key slowly, holding her breath. The mechanism clicked, and the lid sprang open with a soft creak. Inside, wrapped carefully in yellowed tissue paper, lay a single baby shoe. It was tiny, made of soft white leather, with delicate embroidery around the edges. Emily lifted it gently, marveling at how something so small could carry such weight of meaning. A folded piece of paper fluttered from the tissue. Emily caught it before it could fall into the dust. The handwriting matched Grace's diary perfectly. "For when she's found. My dearest Lily wore these the day I had to send her away. Keep them safe until she can know the truth. She wasn't abandoned, she was protected. The evidence is here, but they must never find it. Remember, behind the 3rd brick, beneath the rose." Emily read the note 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. She imagined Grace writing these words. Perhaps in this very space, knowing she might never see her daughter again. The shoe suddenly felt like the most precious thing she'd ever held. Buddy's head snapped up, his ears pricking forward. Emily froze, straining to listen. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the front door lock. The creak of hinges seemed impossibly loud in the empty house. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor above them, the slow, deliberate stride she recognized as Frank Holloway's. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. She clicked off the flashlight, plunging them into darkness. Buddy pressed against her leg, his body tense but mercifully quiet. She clutched the box to her chest, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps moved closer to their hiding place. Dust drifted down as Frank's weight made the floorboards groan directly overhead. Emily closed her eyes, though it made no difference in the pitch blackness. The darkness pressed against her like a physical thing, and every tiny sound seemed magnified 1,000 times. She could hear Frank muttering to himself, his words indistinct but his tone angry. Something scraped across the floor above. Was he moving furniture? Searching for something? Buddy's fur bristled against her hand. She gripped his collar, silently willing him to stay still, to stay quiet. One bark would give them away. The footsteps paused, directly above the hidden door. Emily's heart thundered in her chest, as Frank's footsteps drew nearer to the hidden room. She clutched the small box containing Lily's shoe, and pressed herself against the far wall of the crawlspace, Buddy warm against her leg. The golden retriever, sensing her fear, remained perfectly still. Above them, Frank's muttering grew clearer. "Has to be here somewhere. Knew I heard something." Emily's mind raced. The main door was directly under Frank's feet, but she remembered seeing a narrow back exit when she'd explored deeper into the crawlspace. It would be tight, but it might lead to salvation. "Come on, boy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Crouching low, she inched backward, feeling her way in the darkness. Buddy followed, his paws silent on the dusty floor. The space grew narrower, wooden beams pressing in from above until she had to crawl on her hands and knees. Just as Frank's flashlight beam cut through the entrance of the hidden room, Emily's fingers found what she was searching for. A small door, likely once used for coal delivery. She pushed against it, praying it wouldn't squeal on its ancient hinges. The door resisted, then gave way with only the softest groan. Cold morning air rushed in. Emily squeezed through the opening, helping Buddy follow. They emerged into the overgrown backyard just as Frank's voice echoed from inside the crawlspace. "What the hell is all this?" Emily didn't wait to hear more. She scrambled to her feet and ran, clutching the precious box and diary to her chest. Buddy loped beside her as they cut through neighboring yards, not stopping until they were several blocks away. Gasping for breath, she leaned against a tree. The box was still secure in her arms, its tiny key pressing into her palm. As her heartbeat steadied, a name floated up from her memory: Margaret Bennett. She'd seen it mentioned multiple times in Grace's letters, always with warmth and trust. "The nursing home," Emily murmured to Buddy. "That's where we need to go." Sunshine Valley Care Center sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The building was older but well-maintained, with cheerful flower boxes in the windows. Emily straightened her windblown hair and approached the front desk, where a young woman looked up from her computer. "I'm looking for Margaret Bennett," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm a friend of the family," the receptionist smiled. "Oh, Margaret's one of our favorites. She's in the garden room, down that hall, last door on the right." Emily found Margaret sitting in a sunlit corner, a half-finished puzzle spread before her. Though her hair was snow-white, and her hands showed age spots, her blue eyes were sharp and alert as they fixed on Emily. "Mrs. Bennett?" Emily stepped forward. "I'm Emily Carter. I found something that belonged to your friend Grace Holloway." Margaret's hands trembled as they left the puzzle pieces. "Grace?" Her voice was soft but clear. "No one's spoken that name to me in years." Emily pulled up a chair and set the box and diary on the table. "I found these in a hidden room at the old Holloway duplex. I've been reading Grace's words, and your name appeared so many times. She trusted you." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she touched the diary's worn cover. "She was my dearest friend. We shared so many cups of tea, so many worries about our children." She looked up at Emily. "You found the hidden room?" Emily nodded, then gently opened the box to reveal the baby shoe. Margaret's breath caught. "Oh Lord," she whispered. "Lily's first shoes. Grace showed them to me the day before." Her voice trailed off. "Before what, Mrs. Bennett?" Emily leaned forward. "What happened to Grace?" Margaret's fingers traced the embroidery on the tiny shoe. "Grace didn't run away, like they said. She was silenced by people who wanted her gone, people who thought they were protecting their family name." She glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "The Holloways had power in this town back then. Still do." "And Lily?" Emily asked softly. "Grace's daughter?" Margaret's eyes clouded with old pain. "They arranged it all so quietly. A backdoor adoption through a private agency. The child was placed elsewhere, far from here. Grace fought it, of course. That's why they..." She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. "Why didn't anyone speak up?" Emily asked, her throat tight with emotion. "Fear." Margaret's voice was heavy with regret. "We were all so afraid. The Holloways owned half the businesses in town. My husband worked at their factory. We had 3 children to feed." She touched the diary again. "I've carried this silence for so long." Emily covered Margaret's weathered hand with her own. "I promise you, Mrs. Bennett, Grace's story won't stay buried. I won't let it be forgotten." Margaret's grip was surprisingly strong as she clutched Emily's fingers. Her eyes, bright with unshed tears, met Emily's steadily. "Then you'll be the first who ever cared to try." The words hung in the sunlit room, heavy with decades of unspoken truth. Outside the window, leaves rustled in the breeze, and somewhere down the hall, a clock chimed the hour. But in that moment, Emily felt the weight of Grace's past, and Margaret's long-kept secret settle onto her shoulders like a sacred trust. Emily sat cross-legged on her sister's living room floor, spreading out the collected treasures from Grace's hidden room in a careful semicircle. The evening shadows grew long outside as she arranged each item with tender precision: the weathered diary, yellowed letters bound with faded ribbon, black and white photographs curling at the edges, and the tiny leather baby shoe that spoke of such hope and heartbreak. Danny knelt beside her, his teddy bear clutched close, as he studied the items with 7-year-old solemnity. Buddy lay nearby, his tail thumping gently against the carpet as he watched them both. "Who's that?" Danny pointed to a photograph of a young woman in a polka dot dress, her smile bright and carefree as she held a baby in her arms. "That's Grace," Emily said softly, touching the edge of the photo. "And the baby is her daughter, Lily." Danny leaned closer, his small finger tracing the baby's face. "Was Lily like me?" he asked, his voice carrying that direct innocence that only children possess. "Did she lose her daddy too?" Emily's heart clenched. She pulled Danny into her lap, wrapping her arms tight around him. His hair smelled of the apple shampoo he loved, and she could feel his heart beating steady and strong against her chest. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "Lily lost her daddy in a war, just like you lost yours in an accident, but she had a mama who loved her very, very much." Danny was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Where is Lily now?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but I'm going to try to find her. Her mama wanted her to know how much she was loved." They sat together, looking at the photographs spread before them. There was Grace again, younger, in her wedding dress. Another showed her husband in military uniform, his stance proud but his smile gentle. Emily gathered each piece carefully, knowing they were fragments of a story that needed to be told. The next morning, after dropping Danny at school, Emily made her way to the local historical society. The building was a converted Victorian house, its rooms filled with artifacts and documents from the town's past. The historian she'd been referred to worked in what had once been the library, surrounded by filing cabinets and carefully preserved records. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and elbow patches on his tweed jacket. When Emily placed the war medal on his desk, his eyes lit up with professional interest. "Fascinating," he murmured, examining it through a magnifying glass. "This is definitely authentic. A Korean War Service medal. May I ask where you found it?" Emily explained about the hidden room, watching as he nodded and made notes. "The soldier's name was James Holloway," she said. "I need to know what really happened to him." The historian turned to his computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Holloway. Yes, here we are." He adjusted his glasses. "Private First Class, James Edward Holloway, 23rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division. Declared killed in action in 1952. "Killed in action?" Emily leaned forward. "You're certain?" He nodded, turning the screen so she could see. "The records are quite clear. He was part of a unit caught in heavy fighting near Heartbreak Ridge. His body was recovered and identified." He glanced at Emily curiously. "Why do you ask?" "Because there were rumors," Emily said slowly, "that he came back, that he returned to town years later, but his wife was gone by then." The historian shook his head firmly. "Absolutely impossible. The identification was conclusive. Dental records, dog tags, multiple witnesses. This medal would have been presented to his next of kin, presumably his wife." Emily pulled out one of the photographs, showing it to him. This was his wife, Grace. And this was their daughter, Lily. He studied the image, then began typing again. "Grace Holloway. There are some newspaper mentions. A few social events, charity functions. Then nothing after 1957. He looked up at Emily. "She seems to vanish from the record." "She didn't vanish," Emily said quietly. "She was made to disappear." The historian's expression grew serious. "The Holloways were very influential here during that period. Still are, to some extent. If there was some sort of irregularity, they would have had the means to keep it quiet." Emily shared what she'd learned from Margaret Bennett about the forced adoption. The historian listened intently, making notes and checking dates against his records. "The timeline fits," he said finally, "and it explains why there's no official record of the child. After 1957, these private adoptions were sometimes used to hide uncomfortable family situations." He sighed. "Not exactly legal, but not uncommon in those days." Emily gathered the medal and photographs, her determination growing stronger. "Thank you," she said. "You've helped confirm what I suspected. Grace was telling the truth in her diary. Her husband never came back." Back home that evening, after Danny was asleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table with Grace's diary. She'd read most of it, but had been afraid to look at the final entry. Now, feeling closer than ever to understanding what had happened, she carefully turned to the last page. The handwriting was shaky, unlike Grace's usually neat script. The words seemed rushed, desperate, written perhaps in those last moments before everything changed. Emily's heart pounded as she read. "Her name is Lily. She is loved. Please, if anyone finds this, tell her." Emily touched the words gently, feeling the indentations, where Grace's pen had pressed into the paper. In the quiet kitchen, with only the soft tick of the clock, and Buddy's gentle breathing beside her chair, she made a promise. "I'll find her, Grace." The morning light streamed through tall windows at the county records office, casting long shadows across endless rows of filing cabinets. Emily's fingers were already dusty from handling old documents, and her eyes were tired from squinting at faded type. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. The historian sat beside her at a wooden table, his tweed jacket draped over the back of his chair. Together, they'd been methodically working through adoption records from 1957, searching for any trace of Lily Holloway. The private adoptions were often disguised as standard proceedings, he explained, carefully turning another brittle page. But there would still need to be some official documentation, even if the details were obscured. Emily nodded, thinking of the tiny shoe hidden safely in her purse. Her throat felt tight whenever she remembered Grace's note, for when she's found, she wouldn't let that mother's hope go unanswered. Buddy lay quietly under the table, occasionally nudging Emily's leg, as if offering encouragement. The morning wore on, marked by the steady tick of an old wall clock and the rustling of papers. "Wait," the historian said suddenly, holding up a document. "Look at this entry." Emily leaned closer, her heart beating faster as she read. The adoption record was dated July 15, 1957. A baby girl, original name listed as Lily Holloway, adopted by the Porter family and renamed Lillian Porter. "This has to be her," Emily whispered, touching the paper gently. The timing matches perfectly with Grace's diary. The historian was already pulling up additional records on his laptop. "Let me cross-reference this with current address databases." His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard while Emily held her breath. "Here she is," he said after a few minutes. "Lillian Porter, age 66. She lives in Pine Grove Retirement Community in Riverside." He looked up at Emily. "That's just 2 towns over, about 20 minutes away." Emily sat back in her chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what they'd found. This wasn't just a historical mystery anymore. This was a real person, Grace's daughter, living and breathing just 20 minutes away. "What do I even say to her?" Emily murmured, more to herself than the historian. "How do I tell someone their whole life story might be different than they thought?" The historian removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. "You have proof," he reminded her. "The diary, the photographs, the adoption record. And most importantly, you have evidence of her mother's love." Emily gathered the documents carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I couldn't have found this without your help." He smiled kindly. Sometimes the past needs advocates, people willing to dig through dusty records and ask difficult questions. "You're doing the right thing, giving voice to Grace's story." Outside, the spring morning had warmed considerably. Emily sat in her car for a long moment, Buddy patient beside her, in the passenger seat. She needed to pick up Danny from school soon, but her mind was already racing ahead to what came next. When she collected Danny, his face lit up at the sight of her expression. "Did you find something, Mom?" She helped him buckle his seatbelt, Buddy wagging his tail from the back seat. "We found her, sweetie. We found out where Lily lives." Danny's eyes went wide. "Really? Are you going to go see her?" Emily started the car, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nerves. "I think I have to. She deserves to know the truth about her mom." "But you're scared," Danny observed with a child's directness. "A little," Emily admitted. "It's a big thing to tell someone." Danny was quiet for a moment, then said, "If you found her shoe, you can find her too." Emily glanced at her son in the rearview mirror, touched by his simple faith. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. Danny was right. She'd come this far, following Grace's trail of breadcrumbs. She couldn't stop now. At home, Emily spent the afternoon preparing. She organized Grace's diary, the photographs, and the adoption record into a folder. The baby shoe she wrapped carefully in tissue paper, just as Grace had done so many years ago. Each item was a piece of proof, a fragment of truth that had waited 60 years to be revealed. As the sun began to set, Emily stood in front of her bathroom mirror, smoothing her hair and trying to calm her racing heart. What if Lily didn't want to know? What if she was happy in her life, uninterested in old secrets? But then she remembered Grace's desperate final words in the diary. "Her name is Lily. She is loved. Please, if anyone finds this, tell her." She couldn't ignore that plea, couldn't let Grace's truth remain buried any longer. Her sister agreed to watch Danny, giving Emily a tight hug before she left. "You're doing a good thing," she whispered. "Remember that." The drive to Riverside felt both too long and too short. Buddy sat quietly in the passenger seat, his steady presence helping to calm her nerves. The retirement community was a peaceful place, with neat gardens and winding paths between modest homes. Emily parked in front of the address they'd found, a small house with cheerful window boxes full of spring flowers. For a long moment, she sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to find her courage. Finally, she reached for her purse and the folder of documents. "Come on, Buddy," she whispered. "Let's finish what Grace started." The path to the front door was lined with carefully tended roses. Emily's legs felt shaky as she walked, Buddy padding faithfully beside her. The folder seemed to grow heavier with each step, weighted with 60 years of secrets and silence. At last, they stood before Lillian Porter's door. Emily gripped Buddy's leash tightly, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. Emily's heart pounded as she heard movement inside the house. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her late 60s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that reminded Emily startlingly of Grace's photograph. "Yes?" Lillian Porter asked, her voice gentle but cautious. She glanced at Buddy, who sat quietly at Emily's side. Emily took a deep breath. "Mrs. Porter, my name is Emily Carter. I found something that belongs to you." Her hands trembled as she held the folder. "It's about your mother, Grace Holloway." Lillian's face went pale, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. I don't know what you're talking about. My parents were the Porters." "Please," Emily said softly. "I know this must be shocking, but I found your mother's diary, in the house where she lived, where I was living until recently." There was a hidden room. Something flickered in Lillian's eyes, a mixture of fear and desperate hope. After a long moment, she stepped back. "Come in," she whispered. "Both of you." The living room was cozy, filled with quilts and family photos. Emily noticed there were no pictures from before Lillian's teenage years. They sat on a floral sofa, Buddy settling at their feet. "I've always known I was adopted," Lillian said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The Porters told me when I was 12. But they never knew anything about my birth mother, or they wouldn't tell me." Emily opened the folder with trembling fingers. "Your mother's name was Grace Holloway. She was widowed during the Korean War, when you were just a baby." She carefully removed the photograph of Grace holding infant Lily. "This is you, with her." Lillian's hands shook as she took the photograph. Her eyes filled with tears as she traced her mother's face. She's beautiful," she whispered. "I've never seen her before, never known what she looked like." "There's more," Emily said gently, removing the diary. "She wrote about you, about how much she loved you." Lillian's breath caught. "She wrote about me?" Emily nodded, opening to the final entry. Her voice was soft as she read. "Her name is Lily. She is loved. Please, if anyone finds this, tell her." The tears that had been gathering in Lillian's eyes spilled over. "She loved me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All this time, I thought she didn't want me." "She wanted you more than anything," Emily said, showing her the earlier entries describing Grace's fierce love for her baby girl. "Something happened, something that made her afraid. There are hints in her writing about being watched, about people wanting to hurt you both." Lillian wiped her eyes, her shoulders shaking. "I never felt like I belonged with the Porters," she admitted. "They were good people, they tried their best, but I always felt like a puzzle piece from the wrong box, like I was meant to fit somewhere else." Emily reached into her bag and carefully unwrapped the tiny shoe. "She left this for you too." It was wrapped in tissue paper with a note that said, "For when she's found." Lillian cradled the shoe in her palms like it was made of glass. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew someone would find me someday, would tell me the truth." They sat in silence for a moment, Buddy resting his head on Lillian's knee, as if sensing her need for comfort. Outside, the spring evening was settling in, casting long shadows through the windows. "I need to see it," Lillian said suddenly, clutching the diary to her chest. Her voice was stronger now, filled with determination. "I need to see where she lived. And where she wrote this. Where she loved me." Emily watched as Lillian ran her fingers over the diary's worn cover, tracing her mother's name. The simple gesture contained 60 years of longing, a lifetime of questions finally finding their answers. In that moment, Emily understood that finding Lily wasn't just about fulfilling Grace's last wish. It was about healing a wound that had been open for far too long. The morning sun cast long shadows across the duplex's worn steps as Emily parked her car along the curb. Her 7-year-old son Danny bounced excitedly in the back seat, while Buddy's tail thumped against the upholstery. In the passenger seat, Lillian Porter sat very still, her hands folded tightly around her mother's diary. "Are you ready?" Emily asked gently. Lillian nodded, though her fingers trembled as she reached for the door handle. "I've waited 60 years for this moment. I don't think anyone's ever really ready for something like that." They climbed out of the car together, Buddy staying close to Danny's side. The spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwoods, and somewhere a cardinal called. Emily couldn't help but think how different this moment felt from her first arrival at the duplex months ago, when she'd been desperate and afraid. "This is where my mother lived," Lillian whispered, touching the weathered siding. "Where she held me, where she—" The sharp slam of a car door cut through the morning quiet. Frank Holloway strode across the lawn, his face twisted with anger. "What do you think you're doing here?" he demanded. "You've got no right to be on this property." Danny pressed closer to Emily's side, while Buddy's fur bristled. But before Emily could respond, another vehicle pulled up, the historian's sensible sedan. He stepped out carrying a thick manila envelope. "Actually, Mr. Holloway," The historian said, his voice calm but firm. "We have every right to be here, and I have documentation you might find interesting." Frank's face reddened. "Whatever you think you know. I know that in 1957, your grandfather orchestrated the removal of Grace Holloway and the illegal adoption of her child," the historian interrupted, pulling papers from his envelope. "I have the original adoption records here, showing the falsified signatures and correspondence between your grandfather and certain officials who helped cover up Grace's disappearance." Emily watched as the color drained from Frank's face. The historian continued, "The statute of limitations may have expired on the criminal aspects, but the civil implications." He let the sentence hang meaningfully. Frank's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. His eyes darted between the historian's steady gaze and Lillian's tear-streaked face. Finally, he spat out, "Do whatever you want. It's not my problem anymore." He turned and stormed away, gravel crunching under his feet as he retreated to his car. Lillian's hands shook as she watched him go. "All these years," she whispered. They knew what happened to her." Emily squeezed her arm gently. "But they couldn't hide the truth forever. Are you ready to go inside?" Danny tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Can I show Mrs. Lilly the secret door, please?" A small smile touched Lillian's lips at the boy's enthusiasm. "I'd like that very much, Danny." They made their way inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. Emily's furniture and boxes were long gone, but somehow the space felt more alive than ever. Danny led them to the corner where Buddy had first discovered the hidden panel. "See?" Danny said proudly, pointing to the section of wall. "Buddy found it. He's really smart." The golden retriever wagged his tail at the praise, nosing at the familiar spot. Emily stepped forward and carefully pulled away the loose section of plaster they'd uncovered before. The hidden doorway gaped dark and mysterious. "Would you like to go first?" Emily asked Lillian softly. Lillian nodded, clutching Grace's diary to her chest. Emily clicked on her flashlight, illuminating the narrow passage. One by one, they squeezed through. First Lillian, then Emily, Danny, and finally Buddy, his nails clicking on the wooden floor. The beam of the flashlight swept across the hidden room, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The rocking horse stood exactly as Emily had first found it, its painted eyes watching silently. Boxes and trunks lined the walls, each one holding pieces of Grace's interrupted life. Lillian moved slowly into the center of the room, turning in a complete circle as she took everything in. Her fingers traced the spines of old books, touched the faded wallpaper, lingered on the arm of the rocking horse. "She touched these things," she whispered. "She walked here. She held me here." Danny watched with wide eyes as Lillian knelt beside the rocking horse. From her pocket, she withdrew the tiny baby shoe Emily had found. With trembling hands, she placed it carefully on the horse's worn saddle. Tears streamed freely down Lillian's cheeks now, but she was smiling, a smile of such profound relief and joy that Emily felt her own eyes growing wet. Buddy padded over and gently nuzzled Lillian's hand, offering silent comfort. "I'm home, Mama," Lillian whispered. Emily stepped forward and squeezed her shoulder, feeling the weight of generations of love and loss in that simple touch. The air in the hidden room seemed to shift, as if a long-held breath was finally being released. In that moment, Emily knew with absolute certainty that Grace's spirit was at peace at last. The late summer breeze carried the scent of blooming gardenias through Lillian's screened porch. Emily sat in a worn wicker chair, watching as golden afternoon light filtered through the trees. In the 3 weeks since they'd moved in, this spot had become her favorite place to reflect. Inside, she could hear Danny's delighted giggles mixing with Lillian's warm voice as they prepared dinner together. The sound made her heart swell. What had started as a desperate situation, an eviction notice, and nowhere to go, had transformed into something beautiful and unexpected. Buddy dozed at her feet, his golden fur catching the sunlight. Emily reached down to scratch behind his ears, remembering how his determined pawing at that wall had changed everything. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy?" she whispered. His tail thumped lazily against the wooden floor in response. Every evening now had a special ritual. After dinner, they would gather in Lillian's cozy living room, where Grace's diary held pride of place on the coffee table. Lillian would carefully turn the pages, reading her mother's words aloud like precious bedtime stories. Danny would curl up next to her, completely absorbed in tales of a grandmother he never knew but somehow felt connected to. Emily loved watching them together. Danny had taken to Lillian immediately, asking her endless questions about everything from her garden to her collection of vintage photographs. Lillian, in turn, doted on him with the grandmother's love she'd never had the chance to give before. The house itself seemed to embrace them. Lillian had insisted they move in just until you get back on your feet. But Emily could sense something deeper growing. The spare bedroom now held Danny's toys and books. Emily's coffee mug had found its own spot in the kitchen cabinet. Photos of the three of them had begun appearing on walls that once held only Lillian's solitary memories. They were healing each other, Emily realized. Lillian was finally experiencing the family love she'd been denied, while Emily and Danny found the stability and support they desperately needed. Even Buddy had settled in completely, claiming the sunny spot by the back door as his new favorite napping place. The screen door creaked open, and Danny bounded out onto the porch. "Mom, Lily's teaching me how to make biscuits like Grandma Grace used to make. Come see." Emily smiled at his enthusiasm. He'd started calling Lillian Lily, naturally, and the older woman's eyes had filled with tears the first time she heard it. Now it felt perfectly right, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. Lillian appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her silver hair. "These biscuits won't bake themselves," she said with a warm smile, "and someone promised to help with the honey butter." "That would be me," Emily laughed, standing up. Buddy's ears perked up at the movement, and he followed them inside. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with baking. Danny stood on a step stool at the counter, his small hands covered in flour as he carefully cut out biscuit shapes. Lillian guided him gently, showing him how to work the dough, without overhandling it. "Grace wrote about making these in her diary," Lillian said softly. "She said she hoped to teach her little girl someday." Her voice caught slightly, but her smile remained steady. "I guess we're just a generation late." Emily squeezed Lillian's hand, understanding the bittersweet joy in that moment. These simple domestic scenes held such profound healing. Every shared meal, every bedtime story, every small tradition they created together helped stitch their wounded hearts into something whole and new. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, they carried their fresh biscuits out to the porch. Danny's face beamed with pride as everyone praised his baking skills. Buddy sat hopefully nearby, receiving his own well-deserved treat for being such a patient kitchen companion. The golden light painted everything in warm hues, making the moment feel almost magical. Danny leaned against Lillian as she told him stories about her day, their laughter floating on the evening air. Buddy stretched out contentedly at Emily's feet, his tail wagging softly at the peaceful scene. Emily watched them all, her heart full. "Sometimes," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "the walls we break reveal the family we never knew we had." If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stick around. Subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow with another story that speaks softly but stays deeply.